Hi, I'm Marika, and I met you. How long ago was that? Like 5 years ago?
I know.
So wild that it's been that long. And I'm so grateful to be on your podcast. I think it's so wonderful what you're doing, creating spaces to think together and see different perspectives. So yeah, I've never done a podcast before, and I'm excited and nervous.
Hi there. Welcome to Contemplations, the podcast. I am your host, Kinah, and I'm very glad that you're here. I hope that you have your thinking caps on because today is one of my favorite episodes of this season. I got to sit and chat with a very dear friend and sister of mine, Dr. Marika St. who is an amazing artist and person, and she got to tell me a little bit about her experience of nostalgia and how she experiences it from a more internal perspective relative to myself, for example, who experiences nostalgia very externally. She also made some very interesting, remarkable comments about time and her experience with time that I think are just very valuable and mind-blowing, and I really can't wait for you to get into this episode. I can't wait for you to get into it, so much so that I'm gonna stop talking now so that you can actually listen to Marika. And just before you get into it, I just wanted to reiterate how grateful I am to have amazing people like Marika in my life to share such wisdom with me, and I really hope you find valuable insight in some of the things that we're going to be discussing. Enjoy. See you or talk to you later. Okay. All right, we will get started just so that people are not like, "Aww," and then they're not listening to actually what we're talking about. They're like, "Are these people actually going to have a conversation?" Yeah, this is most of what our conversation is about. It's like, "You're great." No, you're great.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, so we're continuing on the topic of nostalgia, I had a conversation with Alex last week. It was a really great conversation. And sidebar, if you have not listened to that conversation, please go listen. I don't know what else to say apart from that. So today we're going to be continuing on that conversation. But I don't want to think of it only as a continuation. I kind of want to think of it also as getting your perspective, because I was telling you earlier how, as a scientist, I do believe that there are some things that are just like empirically the way they are. They don't really change. They're just like that. But then there are other things that I think are heavily based on how people experience them, and they don't necessarily have one way they show up. So I thought I think nostalgia is one of those things, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about it, because you're someone I consider very wise, and I am interested in how you have experienced nostalgia in your life, because our upbringings are not very similar in terms of the fact that myself and Alex have spent a lot of time in different places, and you, on the other hand, you've traveled a bit, but you've lived in fewer places than we have.
Yep.
So I kind of wanted to pick your brain to understand how you interact with nostalgia. And so I will get started with the first question and ask you how you would describe nostalgia. So there is, of course, the standard definition, but I want to know, whenever you think of the word nostalgia, like, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think of nostalgia as like a yearning to be in another time or space, and like a yearning for a connection to those things, and an emotion that we want to kind of feel again. but it maybe feels fleeting, like something we can't quite grasp onto.
Yeah. I love that you said I love that you used the word yearning and fleeting, because it does sometimes feel like that. I guess that's why it's called nostalgia, where you've had something and you feel like it has left your hands and you're trying to touch it again, but it's just out of reach. So that's very interesting. I'm going to stay on script, but I started thinking about how, like, that's just interesting how we could know from experience that when we've had this experience, so we've touched it, but then we feel like we've lost it. And that's just a very interesting way that our minds work in that way. Our memories are there in our brain. They might be locked away somewhere that is inaccessible at the moment, but they're there. But then we feel like we've lost them. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Thank you for... Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's true. And maybe when you're saying that, is making me think, I guess that's part of nostalgia, is like we'll never be there exactly in the same way again. And so it's like this desire to feel the thing that is always kind of like just a bit out of grasp or out of our reach, kind of. Which I think contributes to the desire to feel it again and again, because we could never quite fully ever get it.
Wow.
So we revisit it.
That's so true. That's so true. And I think that's the same thing with memories. I don't think you can recreate a memory exactly the same way it was the first time it happened. It's just gone in that way. That makes sense. I didn't think of it that way, in terms of you can go back to the exact same spot that something happened and you can feel very good, but that's a new memory. It can never replace the old memory. And so I guess that yearning is legit because it's something that you truly value, but you can't really recreate. It's not like our computers where you can just copy and paste and it's the exact same thing showing up.
So true.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I will transition to the next question, which might be more detailed for you. I want you to speak on your relationship with nostalgia, and just if you can explore for me, the kind of relationship and interaction you've had with nostalgia. And I mean, has it been entirely positive? Has it been entirely negative? Has it been mixed? And if you could speak more on that.
Yeah, I think it's been mixed mainly. Like, I don't know what it's like for other people, but I think from what I've seen or read, a lot of people have nostalgia for childhood or for like simpler times. And I don't particularly feel I had that, or like that I had like a desire to go back to childhood, because it wasn't like a simple time for me, or like maybe even it wasn't even like an easier time. So in that way, I would say like I don't have that kind of like yearning to relive things, but or revisit emotions. But I do have like moments that I remember as I got older and I started to maybe understand my inner world more, and like I just started to understand, I think, patterns that were happening in my life more. And so those moments, I think, where I really felt more at peace, I would almost feel like a nostalgia for like those moments of realization, or those moments where like I just felt more connected to my inner world or understanding around that. And I do remember one moment in particular where I was sitting with my aunt. She's not my biological aunt, but she's my mom's best friend, and she like is a person that I did a lot of art with growing up. And I remember sitting with her by the river watching like water go by, and I just felt so safe and peaceful. And I just tried to like look around and capture everything that was happening, everything I was feeling, because I knew I'd want to revisit it, and I knew I'd feel nostalgia for that moment. And so I like try to capture it, and then now when I feel stressed or something, I'll go back to that, or I'll revisit that moment, or like try to call it forward, kind of.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it's more like those moments where I try to bring forward rather than a general kind of nostalgia. Yeah.
Wow. That there's so much to unpack there. Thank you so much. That's, again, you are brilliant. Can you speak a little bit more? I thought that was very interesting how in the present, you can be in the present and you're very self-aware to be in a memory being created and know that you're going to go back to that memory. And I think that's very interesting that you said that, because you are an artist, an incredible artist. I'm just, again, you're so cool. I don't even know how. You're just so cool. And but you are someone who, you're very talented in with your art. And I think I've seen some of your work at the Vancouver Art Gallery and also in your room, because I know cool people. And I know that a lot of who you are shines through what you do in your work. So when you're creating memories and you know, like, this is a 2-part question, and sorry it's not part of what I sent to you, but I thought that was very interesting that you put it that way. How does your mind, like, just can you speak a little more as to how you're looking at a memory being formed in the present, and you know that you're going to be nostalgic about that, and how you treat that? Like, what do you do in that present moment? How do you stay in the present and store that memory at the same time, if that makes sense? I don't know if I'm being and then how does that work for you as an artist? Is that something that you go back and make sketches or do pottery? Like, what is there anything? Because I know last week Alex and I talked about how nostalgia can influence the way we do the things that we do. And so for you as an artist who I think has the privilege to do things that last so long that people can go and look at, and it'll bring different things up for them, but you know the memory you're recalling when you make your art. You know what I mean? That, like, you make things that are like, we are in different fields. I do things that people look at it and are expected to see the same thing I'm seeing. Like, that's the point of what I'm doing. But you do things that can mean one thing for you and a billion other things to a billion other people. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit about those things.
Okay, so for the first question, about how we can be in the present and know that we're making memories that we'll want to revisit, I think that it actually connects to like what I did my dissertation on, in terms of thinking about time differently. So like, since I was young, I remember kind of feeling like this really weird relationship to time, where it was like, I can't believe that time actually just works like a clock. Like, I can't believe that, like, it's really just like, one of the authors I was writing about, he describes it as like, Epson Hammer, his name is, he describes it as like a series of homogeneous now points, from like a distant past to a not yet actualized future. So it's like, that's what the clock does to us, is just making it, every moment feel the same kind of. And instead of like, there's all these other ways, I guess, of thinking of time, instead of it being like a flux with like a movement with the reality, or some people described it like Kamal Brathwaite was another person I was reading about, who like talks about cyclical time and how like time moves like the tides, and returns and gathers in moments or in cycles, or like other people talk about echoic time, or time that conflates. And I think that since I was younger, I kind of always felt like it can't just be this one version of time where I'm just like moving through these series of like homogeneous now points, and they're just quickly moving by, and it doesn't, like, every instance has the same weight, and kind of like, I don't know, it felt too mechanical, I guess, for me. And then I think part of that is like realizing that like I can somehow also, like, in a way access like future me, who's gonna want to revisit these memories, and like that way time conflates kind of, and you can access like who you will be and kind of conflate who you are now with who you will be and who you've been. And I think that in that way, I kind of try to do that, like in my life or in certain moments that I'll like know, okay, like I will, like there's like a future me that will revisit this and want to like feel it again. So in a way I can like store that in my body, remember what it feels like, because I will be revisiting this and I will be remembering these moments from the past, and I will want to kind of, I'll be in the future one day and want to kind of conflate time again, and I want to feel like I'm in the past when I'm in the future or whatever. Like, so I think that's kind of like how I have been thinking about it recently, is like, how do I move outside only this kind of like linear unfolding and recognize that there's maybe some other way of like engaging with time. I don't know what it is, but and then your other question about the art, how that impacts my art, is similar because like the art pieces that I make, I think on the one hand, like I see them acting as like gathering points for different moments or pieces of information or things that have influenced my inner world that I'm putting then out onto like the surface of the vases that I make. But then also, like, similarly, it's like, to me, like a play with time, because I hope that people can like pick up the vases and interact with them, and the ones that I leave unfired, I hope that they'll like dissolve as people handle them. So in a way, it's like it's that desire to like oscillate between past interactions and future possibilities. It kind of, the vase itself can act as gathering points for everyone who's come into contact with the work before, whether they just leave their impression on the work, or they speak it out loud, or they touch it, or whatever, and then all the future possibilities, that I can't determine or control, that the vase will take, or the piece will take as time passes, I guess, in that way. So kind of all of that has been around like, how do we sense the echoes of everything that has come to pass, but then also how do we engage with like future possibilities, ones that we like can't fully know in advance.
Oh my gosh. I love you. Have I mentioned that today?
I love you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was so good. So good. And as somebody, the thing is, the way what you're saying is hitting my mind, because as you know this about me, I look at pretty much everything in my life through a lens of faith. And everything you were saying was just making so much sense to me, because I believe that we are eternal beings. I think we are here in this construct of time, but we are not from here. So there's something beyond time that's within us, even though our physical bodies are in a time constraint. And for you to be so self-aware, to be able to tap into that, especially at a very young age, that's very remarkable to me. Because you would need to understand that even on a very deep level that you might not be able to articulate, you might not have been able to articulate at that point. But to understand that there's time, because now you've done your dissertation on it and you have a better understanding of time, but you made this decision not with a PhD. Do you know what I mean? You somehow were able to make the connection that I know who I want to be, or at least I have some idea of that. And whoever that person is going to be tomorrow is going to want to remember today. So I'm going to treat this moment with the respect it deserves, so that tomorrow it can be the memory that serves me well to push me even further. And I think that's very powerful. And to me, when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about how valuable it is to be very self-aware, and it is never too early. And sometimes And another time we can talk about that, because you're such a wealth of experiences. You're a very prime example to me of how some people think that, in fact, I used to hold this thought that if you didn't travel a lot, you can't learn a lot. And that's not essentially true. In some ways, there are things you might not be aware of, but there is such a power in being self-aware. There's such a power in understanding and having a heart that wants to learn, that regardless of where you are found, you can actually learn. Do you know what I mean? Because not everybody has the opportunity, the time, the interest really in being like, oh, what's out there? Which is what Alex and I were talking about last week. And that's kind of how we interact with nostalgia, right? It's very external. It's like, where can I go to build new experiences? But you didn't have the luxury of having a childhood that you're like, oh, I want to go back to that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And to be able to know that even with that, you have within you this eternal capacity to create endless moments and not be confined by time and space somehow. I think that's very powerful. And the lesson I learned from that, like that I'm going to apply to my own life when you were speaking, is I definitely need to become self-aware. More self-aware. I mean, I think I'm fairly self-aware, but I think I need to be more. And I think this is a gift you have from being able to create art and just have something so tactile for like pottery, you know, that you do, very beautiful pieces that you do. And that's one of the reasons I've been very interested in pottery, because when I've seen some of the work you've done, or I've seen people with pottery, it's like such an experience that is very, in my opinion, mentally stimulating, and like just helps your mind really process things. And I want to know what that feels like. And yeah, sorry, we'll probably another time talk about time, because when you mentioned time, I was like, oh, there's so much to talk about with time. You know, there's so much to talk about with the idea of time and how we interact with time. But that's a topic for another day anyway. Oh my goodness, Marika, you are a gem. Thank you for sharing that with me. And this is a nice segue actually into the next question I want to ask you about your thoughts on whether the feeling of nostalgia is more helpful than harmful, or vice versa. And the way I'm thinking about this is, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about, this is not the podcast for that, about your childhood, but I do want to speak on the idea, which you've highlighted, that you grew up around people, like you didn't grow up in isolation. But what might be great memories for the people you grew up with are not great memories for you. And so I want you to speak on what your thoughts are on whether the feeling of nostalgia can be harmful for one person and helpful for the other person, and how, for you at least, you've interacted with that. If you've ever had an interaction where you've had to face a situation where a memory someone is calling forth to you that's causing them joy, is causing you pain. And I know you're like, one of the things people that are listening probably don't know, because they don't know you, that I've known about you, is your heart is just, you have such a kind heart that someone can really be offending you like on purpose. I'm speaking from experience, in terms of, I'm so glad you have me in your life, because I will gladly fight for you. I have zero problems.
I've seen you
someone.
I've seen you do it.
Exactly. Like I have zero problems fighting on your behalf. But the point I'm trying to make is, you are so gracious in the way you, I love you too. You're so gracious in the way you interact with people, that someone can be doing something like that and you still, because you're so contemplative, like you're just the kind of person who thinks a lot of things through, right? And so anyway, before I delve into that, the point I'm trying to make is, how have you dealt with those kinds of situations where you are interacting with someone whose great memories for them are not so great memories for you.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. Like, I think, and some of it maybe also is like you don't even realize till later in life, like why someone bringing up something was like uncomfortable for you. You just know it doesn't feel good. And then maybe later it's like, oh, I can recognize now, like, why this memory, like, when they brought it up, it didn't like feel good in my heart, but they clearly were like joyful about it. And so I think that has happened to me a lot, especially because I just like grew up in like a predominantly white area and school, and I did experience a lot of racism that I didn't really process till later in life. And I think that, and even like a lot of harshness and like stuff that like, I look back now and I'm like, that was really bad. And it's like, I think for others, maybe they look back on the same experience, not the same experience, but the same time and the same space, and they think like, oh, that was so nice, I was so carefree, or like I really enjoyed this time. Or even like I can think in high school, like I think I experienced a lot of really bad like stuff there, and people were like making racist jokes or didn't want me to come to certain places because I was Black, and like people who had like Confederate flags on their truck driving around, and I was like super uncomfortable. But I think in a way like I didn't always process what I was feeling, and I think like, but I hear from other people like, oh, remember the good old days kind of thing, or like, I don't know if that came up when you and Alex were talking, but I know we've talked about that kind of thing where it's like, oh, that was so good. We were like able to have so much fun. Like there was no responsibilities, but for maybe others, and I know I wasn't the only one in my high school who felt that way, and had those experiences, but just like for others, it maybe wasn't so lighthearted, and we don't want to revisit it. And there was the lightheartedness maybe was also accompanied by maybe not to the fault of their own, but just like not a awareness of like what other people were going through at the time, and maybe it wouldn't have felt so lighthearted if they knew fully like what other people were experiencing around them. So I think like in that way, it can be harmful if this just like this desire to go back to like, in quotes, like simpler times, and I hear that a lot, kind of like in the media or in conversations, like people there's like a, I don't want to say people generally, but I know some people can struggle with like maybe also the growing complexity around conversations that happen around justice or other things. Like it's just this desire to go back to times where it just felt a bit easier because it was somehow felt simpler in that time and space for that person. And I think that there's something that isn't the best about that, because I do think we have to be able to hold room for growing complexity, but maybe it's both things. Like there's the harmful part of kind of not being fully aware of the complexity of what was happening at the time, and then wishing for something that actually was harmful to others. But then I think we can also like we can also use nostalgia in kind of like an uplifting way, and we can revisit like what are the feelings we want to create in the future worlds that we are making. So like when we're children, for example, and we revisit memories of feeling safe or happy or joyful, like then that can be those emotions can be ones that influence us in the worlds we are making and the possibilities we are creating together. But hopefully it can be like, those things can influence what's felt on the whole, versus just like, maybe certain people can experience them versus not others. So I think we can revisit what we want to use in the worlds and possibilities that are to come that maybe aren't yet here.
Yeah. Wow. What an incredible conversation. I'm just always so grateful and so in awe of Marika and her wit, and just she's an incredible human being, and I'm really just grateful that as many as are listening get to listen and hear her perspective, because I find great value in her words every single time she speaks to me. So it was really great to have her here. This conversation is not over. It will continue. So please subscribe if you haven't already, so that you can be up to date and so that you can get notified when the next episode, which is the part 2 of our conversation, drops next week. So I hope to see you there, and thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad that you gave me your time today, and I do not take it for granted. And I hope that you have learned something and are inspired to think more deeply about things. Have a beautiful rest of your day, or whatever time it is over there, and I will talk to you on another episode of Contemplations, the podcast. Bye.